Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's NAC at Home program. My name is Nadine Heidinger, and I'm the Director of Communications at the National Arts Club. For those of you who are not familiar with the National Arts Club, we're a 501c3 nonprofit based in New York City with a mission to stimulate, foster, and promote public interest in the arts. Annually, we host over 150 free programs, including exhibitions, theatrical and musical performances, lectures, and readings. To find out more about the National Arts Club, you can find us at nationalartsclub.org, or you can visit us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. And I would be remiss to mention that Giving Tuesday is tomorrow. So if you would like to provide additional support for our free programming, I will be sharing a link in the chat if you'd like to do so. On behalf of our literary committee, it's my pleasure to welcome you to today's event, The Glorious American Essay, a best-selling anthology featuring the book's editor, Phillip Lopate. Phillip Lopate, a celebrated essayist and professor of writing at Columbia School of the Arts, will discuss this quintessential American art form with two of the book's best-known contributors, essayist Vivian Gornick, author of Fierce Attachments, and Wayne Koestenbaum, author of The Queen's Throat. The Glorious American Essay can be purchased from our preferred independent bookseller, Books on Call, via a link we'll be also sharing in the chat during the event. Following the discussion will be a brief Q&A, so please feel free to use the Q&A function for any questions you might have. And without further ado, let me turn it over to Phillip. Please enjoy the program.
Thank you, Nadine. Well, I'm excited because I've been working on this project for about 4 or 5 years, and it was basically a huge labor of research and scholarship, and I'm sort of astonished that it actually got published. But it's a tome. What can I say? You don't want to drop it on your foot or anything. So I'm here to have a conversation with two of my friends, Vivian Gornick and Wayne Koestenbaum. And we'll also be hearing later on from Richard Rodriguez. So you guys, what would you like to know?
Can I ask you first something, Phillip?
Yes, of course.
Okay. You've been chronicling and practicing the essay and teaching it and promulgating it and loving it for many years. And you and the essay are you and the American essay are really synonymous. And so I wonder how the sense within the literary worlds that you move in, and how the sense within your own mind and imagination as well, how the essay as a genre has changed, evolved, shifted. So for you, how has it shifted, and for the various literary communities that you traverse?
Well, you know, I started out as a fiction writer and a poet. I don't think there were many adolescents who dreamed of becoming essayists. It's not the most glamorous, status rich genre. But at a certain point, after I'd written some novels and books of poetry, I fell in love with the essay as a kind of merger of these two kinds of writing I was doing. That is, I do think of myself as a natural storyteller, but I could tell a story about the track of my thoughts, and I could also use some of the associational leaping quality of poetry in the essay, because the essay is a very open form. So I started teaching the personal essay, and then I did the anthology, The Art of the Personal Essay, and it turned out to be quite popular and was adopted by schools all over the country. And in a way, I think I'm not taking full credit for this, but I am saying that in some ways, the personal essay started to dominate the essay form. That is, even when people were not writing personal essays, they would begin with a few paragraphs about themselves, and then they go off on their topics. So somehow the subjective voice became very accepted in essay writing. What happened to me though was that having become the champion of the personal essay, I started getting a little restless. I started thinking, well, this isn't the only kind of essay, you know? And partly because I was writing at that time a lot of literary criticism and a lot of movie criticism, I began to see criticism as an equally valid way of doing essays. And so essentially, I keep expanding the notion of what is an essay so that we come to this book in which I've actually put in sermons, letters, newspaper columns, because it seems to me that I want to unleash the essay and make it a little more impure. I think every art form at some point tries to be pure, you know, like movies said, we can't be like theater. We have to be just visual, you know? So there are all of these prescriptions about what an essay was. You know, some people said the essay had to have an argument. Some people said it must not have an argument. Poppy Blackmere said it was a form of unindoctrinated thinking. Cynthia Ozick said it couldn't be a polemic. And I thought, well, why couldn't it? Why couldn't it have a rational argument or a kind of a defined politics, since every essay in a way has an undefined politics anyway, like it or not? So I started to expand the idea of the essay. And at the same time, what's happened in these last decades is that the essay has gone from being a commercially taboo form where sometimes editors wouldn't even put the word essay on the cover because they were afraid, you know. They're always trying to make essays be, pretend that random collections of essays were really about one subject, you know, in order to sell them. But lo and behold, in the last 10 or 15 years, there have been many essays by young essayists, by middle-aged essayists that have sold very well. And so it's gone from being box office poison to something that is really appreciated, possibly because they're short. You can put it by your nightstand, read one a night, you know, and partially because I think it suits this current moment, which is one of great uncertainty, anxiety, where the dogmatic doesn't seem to work as well, you know. So for all kinds of reasons, I think that it's going through a kind of resurgence now, and I hope that this essay book will contribute to that.
That sort of leads me into the question that I've been wanting to ask you for a long time, and I'm going to ask now. And that is that based on what you've just said, it seems to me that every one of your anthologies, each of those essay collections that you have put together, demonstrates like a different mood in you, a different kind of mood. Some more play, less play, some more irony, less irony. They always have irony in play.
Right.
But they often, in this one especially, it seems to me, for me, it was much more Catholic than I've seen before. And my curiosity has always been twofold. How do you do your research? And then how do you do the selecting? Is it based on an overall mood that you yourself, considering everything you've just said now, you know, you're living a long life with the essay and you must surely have different moods about it. I know you do. And I don't know if that's the right word that you want to address, but if you could just tell us a little bit how you set out to do how you do the research, because I find it amazing that you find all these things, and then how do you select?
So first of all, I want to draw a sharp distinction between my life and personality as a writer and my life and personality as an anthologist. I'm a different person when I'm an anthologist. As a writer, I'm snobbish, I'm crabby, and there's lots of stuff that I don't ever finish reading because it's not to my taste. And then I put on this anthologist hat, and I become much more, as you say, Catholic, much more accepting of different of people who are very different from myself. And so then the trick comes to be, okay, this is a writer who maybe I would not read on my own for pleasure, but I know this is an important writer. I've got to find one essay at least that I can fall in love with, okay, by this writer. Now,
Oh, that's interesting.
so I start out with lists, who are the usual suspects, then who are the unusual suspects, and then I also ask my friends for advice, and in this particular book, they loaded on with many suggestions, so for instance, there was a woman in Madison, Wisconsin who had a lot of great ideas, and she directed me to Hannah Arendt's essay, We Refugees. I never would have known about that essay.
Oh.
I gotta give these friends credit,
Yeah.
They directed me to a lot of things. One time I was giving a reading in some college in upstate New York, and I was sitting next to this professor, and this is sometimes the most painful part of these gigs is when you go for the meal afterwards,
Yes.
But in this particular case, I lucked out because, he said, well, have you ever read Mary Austin? I'd never even heard of Mary Austin, but she's a nature writer. And he said, you have to read, The Land of Little Rain. So I went home, I ordered it. I thought, God, this is a beautiful stylist. And so Mary Austin got into the book. And then, I started to be, I don't know if perverse is the right word, but to look at things that usually aren't considered. So that's what got me into George Washington's farewell address or the Federalist Papers. Why can't we consider the Federalist Papers these crucial essays in American history? So for me, this particular book ran on two tracks. One was the evolution of the essay in American literature, and the other was American history. And so I keep, the older I get, the more I get fascinated by history. I can't help it. So I really started, compiling all this stuff, reading so much, a lot of dead ends, by the way, things that didn't pan out. But still, after a while, it's like any kind of research. You at first you think you'll never come to the end of it, and then you start realizing that people are repeating themselves and that you know that fact already. So eventually, I compiled this list. It probably would have been 5,000 pages, all the essays that should go into something like this. Well, that wasn't going to cut it, So I had to start eliminating, and I was looking for a kind of balance, looking also for streams, for themes, like, feminism, for instance,
Yeah, you did brilliantly on that one. You did marvelously on that one. I'm so grateful that you put in The Solitude of Self.
The Solitude of Self. Vivian Gornick had written a whole book about this essay.
Yeah.
And she also wrote a book about Emma Goldman. So Emma Goldman got in,
Right.
I'm very impressionable where you're concerned, Vivian.
Well, I was very grateful for both inclusions.
But there are lots of other women writers, of course, Margaret Fuller, Sarah Grimke, on into the present moment, And then nature and environmental writing. I thought this was a whole subgenre in the essay, and someone like Audubon, who we don't think of as an essayist, but was quite a good writer, writes this essay about the pigeon, and you realize how many, there used to be millions of pigeons in the sky, so much has been lost,
I didn't know that.
So Audubon and John Muir and John Burroughs and
So it's a combination for you of serendipitous suggestions, just like a journalist goes out into the world and tells everybody they know what they're doing and then wait for those connections. And then on top, then you use these serendipitous connections that speak to you to actually read everything that person has written and cull from it. It's fantastic, the amount of work it's.
Well, in part, I was working off of this field in academia. It's called American Studies. And in American Studies, there were these important texts, things like George Santayana's essay on the Genteel tradition in American philosophy. So, I would talk to a professor like Ross Posnack, and he would say Santayana, he'd recommend Witch Mencken, and so on, So that was another strand that I was following out.
You know, a strand that I saw very clearly as I had the joy of paging through this head note by head note, read all your head notes last night, Philip, and they're so eloquent and confiding. They're really, really beautiful. And read like a paragraph or two from each essay and really just tried to find continuities. And one thing I noticed, and this is, I think, a tribute to your powers of selection, each essay here has a self-consciousness about its genre. And it never, I know that most acute works of literature know that they are the genre they are and in some way reflect that knowledge. But, you know, so a lyric poem, we know that the lyric poem is going to be, you know, weighted with this knowledge that it's a lyric poem and all the lyric poems that have come before. So many of the essays here are, as they say these days, in conversation with the essay form itself. And I don't know if what thoughts you have about that kind of the DNA of essayistic self-consciousness within essay writing.
I do think that that those who interest me as essayists love the essay form. And also, they're not only in conversation with the form, but they're in conversation with each other. Because one of the peculiar characteristics of the essay, as a form that's, you know, passed down from century to century, is that the essayists are talking to each other. They're in conversation with each other. You know, Cicero writes an essay on friendship. Montaigne writes an essay on friendship, quotes Cicero. Hazlitt writes an essay on Montaigne. Virginia Woolf writes an essay on Hazlitt, you know. And so I wanted to get these vibrations, these conversations going. So for instance, I chose this essay by John J. Chapman called Coatesville. It's a very powerful short essay. And then I chose by Edmund Wilson, a biographical essay on John J. Chapman, who was really an odd duck. So I knew I had to put Edmund Wilson in. He's too important not to. But it seems to me that Wilson's best essays are biographical essays. He loves that form of the life, you know? So I thought, this would be great. They'll talk to each other, you know? And they are talking to each other.
Yeah.
You wrote some marvelous things about the essay film that I happened to read recently.
Oh, I remember that, yeah.
So I wondered also whether you think that there is some way that the energies or generic properties of essays leach into other forms.
Certainly they leach into other forms. And at one point I had a fantasy of having a whole graphic essay section, but that didn't come to be. But certainly the essay film, which is a form I'm very devoted to, and as you say, have written about, it's that same experimental, skeptical, quality that attracts filmmakers, and of course there were also many novelists, you know, especially in the 20th and 21st century, who are essayistic, you know.
Yes, a lot.
I mean, you know, and that's a writer like Saul Bellow actually was incredibly essayistic in his novels. His essays are not that great because he basically poured all his essayistic energies into his novels.
Yeah.
But you know, you look at Proust, Uziel, Braque, Kundera, all these people are on into Bernhardt and Bolaño, Sebald, and so on. You know, David Foster Wallace, Nicholson Baker. You know, you have all these people who are drawing energy from the essay form.
Yeah. Well, they're not really novelists.
They're not really novelists. They are novelists, of course they're novelists. They're envious of the essayist's ability to not just show, but also to tell.
Yes. That essayistic quality is dominant throughout the 19th century, and it's marvelous, and I miss it a lot.
Well, it's back. It's coming back, but you see it in Tolstoy. You see it in you see it in George Eliot. You see it in
certainly. Yeah, Eliot. Yeah.
It's fascinating also that I noticed in many of these essays, the qualities of suspense that essay writers wield. I mean, in terms of that there's often I can't give specific examples from the top of my head, but that an essayist will begin with a very small bit of information, a word, a short paragraph, just this, and then gradually tease out its significances in a way that produces a sense of great mystery and suspense and drama. I was really surprised to see that.
Yes.
The power of the essayist's dramatic restraint.
Well, I think that side by side with this notion of the essay as being something where you follow your thoughts and you have all this freedom, you also have to have discipline and you have to have rigor. And one of the things that sustains an essay is planting dynamite sticks of suspense in the essay. So as you're writing, you're following your thoughts, but you're also aware that certain tensions are arising. And over the course of the essay, you're going to keep returning to these tensions, and that's partly the way that I see the essay. I understand essays as having tension and suspense. And you're right to say, Wayne, that it often starts out with something very small, because essays often are they're drawn to the small. It has something to do with the modesty of the form, but they're drawn to the small or the local, the daily, and from that, a larger significance comes. An essay can be sunk if you start out with too large a problem, peace in the Middle East or something, So you have to start small and then you spin out.
Well, the other day I was thinking, after I was flossing after dinner, I thought, how come nobody's really talked about the flossing is so important? And I really thought, though, okay, this is a tweet. This is not an essay. There are limits, but I hear you maybe giving a kind of permission for even flossing.
Well, Eileen Miles does have a very good essay about dentistry and flossing and stuff like that.
Eileen Miles does?
Yes, yeah. So that's not to say you shouldn't try it, Wayne.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, if you want to write an essay about flossing, the burden is on you.
The burden is really on you.
No, we give no quarter, we readers. You have to really gain.
I know.
You have to really gain, go that extra mile to gain our interest and allegiance.
I'm a disappointing flosser, because every time I go to the dentist, they say, "Well, have you started flossing yet?" I say, "No, not yet." I feel like I have a lot of energy to give to my teeth, and that I don't have the brain space for flossing.
And that would be the structure of the essay. You would begin with that, and the not yet, the postponement of flossing. You would never even get to flossing. You would cover everything else in your mind and personal history.
Well, that's another theme that connects to your notion of tension is resistance. I'm very interested in when you write an essay, as you're writing it, can you also explore your own resistance to writing this piece, and the resistances within your own so-called conviction. And that does make for a kind of complexity and tension, I will say another thing, which is that one of my limits as an anthologist is that I'm very partial to humor and irony, and very not so partial to solemnity,
Mm-hmm. Why do you look upon that as a limitation?
Well,
you said you think it's a limitation?
Well, it means that almost all the essays that I've included do have some sense of, if not humor, at least irony.
That's true. Yeah, that is true. Yes, I realized that after the first collection of yours, The Art of a Personal Essay. And I was interested to see that you did in fact make all your selections work, but it was very clearly, that's what made me realize an anthologist has a mood also. An anthology has a mood.
It has a mood. Well, it has a mood, but it also, the word canon has become a dirty word, but I do feel like I'm trying to assert a kind of canon, as long as it's flexible, as long as it can be the start of a conversation. We need to think about what from the past is worth moving into the present, what we should be holding on to. you know?
One thing I think that it's also part of the mood of this anthology has to do with a short sentence. I know there are long sentences here too, but I was so struck by the pithiness on the level of the sentence. So many of these essays have.
Well, because essays move toward
Yeah.
aphorism, they move toward epigram, because a lot of times essays start out with the particular, and then they they try to get to this point where okay, it's not just about me, it's about some general law, and that's where the aphorism comes in. I think that's why Sontag loved the essay, and she was very partial to aphorisms.
I think also, perhaps, Wayne, that it has more to do with the essayistic devotion to lucidity. I used to have a book I used to teach out of called Clear and Simple as the Truth. It was a collection written by two academics which followed the French classical style. Clear and Simple as the Truth. Primo Levi wrote a marvelous piece on his devotion to the lucid sentence. And that lucid sentence is almost invariably short.
I mean, Vivian, your essay here, The Princess and the Pea, which is marvelous, is some of the sentences are not all short, but they are very short. Looking right now, and I don't want to embarrass you, and you're going to maybe read it.
She's going to read from some of it.
She's going to read it, but they're really something else, and they have this quality of, it's sort of like on the model of to be or not to be. That is the question. It's a kind of ultimate sentence that folds in on itself and holds itself and is a kind of ultimatum.
It is my intention, my finally, after many years of doing this, informed intention to do what Philip has been talking about, which is to track my own thoughts. I feel with every sentence I write that I'm trying to clarify my thoughts.
Clarify.
Yeah.
And I do.
My favorite word in the whole language, clarify.
Clarify. And I do think that.
Clarify.
Clarify. I do think that the essay is a form, even into this period of late modernism, which still puts a premium on rationality. On rationality, it's really not. It's not a good form for psychopaths. I mean, you need to be sane essentially. Even if you're a contrarian, you need to be a sane contrarian. Now, one of the reasons that essays have become more central to our discourse is because they were adopted for all kinds of identity groups. Because every minority, be it ethnic, sexual preference, disability, so on, will be drawn to the essay as a way of defining what the group is. On the other hand, one of the things that's interesting about some essays is that they push against the identity. They quarrel with the identity. So I think I'm going to go now to Richard Rodriguez, who was kind enough to pre-tape a piece from his essay, Hispanic, which does some of that. And then maybe we can hear a bit from Wayne and a bit from Vivian, their essays too. So Nadine, would you cue up the Richard Rodriguez tape?
I'm Richard Rodriguez. I've written a book called Brown, The Last Discovery of America. There's an essay in that book called Hispanic. Hispanic. 1, Spanish, adjective. 2, Latin American, adjective. 3, Hispano, noun. An American citizen or resident of Spanish descent. 4, ducking under the cyclone fence, noun. 5, seen running from the scene of the crime, adjective. Clinging to a raft off the Florida coast. Elected mayor in New Jersey. Elevated to bishop or traded to the San Diego Padres. Awarded the Golden Pomegranate by the US Census Bureau. Most fertile. Soon an oxymoron. America's largest minority. An utter absurdity. destined to outnumber blacks. A synonym for the future, salsa having replaced ketchup on most American kitchen tables. Madonna's daughter, Sammy Sosa's son, little Elian and his great big family. The Gile Rocio novel about 10 sisters, their sorrows and joys and interuterine devices. The new face of American Protestantism. Evangelical minister, tats on his arms, wouldn't buy a used car from. Highest high school dropout rate. Magical realism. The question remains, do Hispanics exist? I tell myself on mornings like this, the fog is burned off early, that I'm really going to give it up. Hispanicism cannot interest me anymore. My desk, a jumble of newspaper clippings. The question remains, do Hispanics exist? I tell myself on mornings like this, the fog is burned off easy. I tell myself on mornings like this, the fog is burned off early, that I'm really going to give it up. Hispanicism cannot interest me anymore. My desk, a jumble of newspaper clippings. Look at all this. Folders. It looks like a set for the Macropolis case. I will turn instead to the death agony of a moth, the gigantic shuddering of lantern paper wings. Or I will count the wrinkles on Walton Pond. I will write some of those constipated, low-paying, fin de siècle essays about the difficulty of saying anything in this, our age. Vici darte from now on, as Susan Sontag sang so memorably from the chapel of San Andrea de la Valle. For years now, I have pursued Hispanicism as a solitary, self-appointed inspector in an old Hitchcock will dog some great hoax, amassing data, abstractedly setting down his coffee cup at a precarious angle to its saucer, to the stack of papers and books and maps on which it rests, because he is drawn to some flashlit, spyglassed item in the morning paper. I'm catching them up, slowly, inexorably, confident of the day, soon, when I shall publish my findings. Soon. I take my collapsible double irony on tour to hotel ballroom conferences and C-SPAN televised luncheons and Diversity Week lectures at universities. For a fee, I rise to say, I am not Latin American because I am Hispanic. I am Hispanic because I live in the United States. Thank you. For a larger fee, I will add that there is no such thing as a Hispanic. Thank you. But this morning, I have decided after all to join the hoax. Hispanic has had its way with me. I suspect also with you.
All right, Vivian, would you like to
Yeah.
read a piece of The Princess and the Pea?
Okay. That was wonderful. And a great,
He's a great essayist, Richard Rodriguez. Yeah.
yeah, to the way in which you can fool around with the essay. Yeah, that was really good. Okay, The Princess and the Bee. I will read the first two paragraphs. That's enough. I learned early that life was either Chekhovian or Shakespearean. In our house, there was no contest. My mother lay on a couch in a half-darkened room, one arm flung across her forehead, the other pressed against her breast. I'm lonely, she cried. And from every quarter of the tenement, women and men also flapped about, trying to assuage an anguish of the soul they took to be superior. But she turned away, her eyes closed in frantic dissatisfaction. She wanted a solace of the spirit none of them could provide. They were not the right people. No one around her was the right person. There had been only one right person, and now he was dead. She had elevated love to the status of the Holy Grail. To find love was not simply to have sexual happiness, it was to achieve a place in the universe. When she married my father, she told me, a cloud of obscurity lifted from her soul. That's how she put it, a cloud of obscurity. Papa was magic, his look, his touch, his understanding. She leaned forward when she got to the end of this sentence. Understanding was the talismanic word. Without understanding, she said, she didn't know she was alive. With understanding, she felt centered and in the world. In my father's presence, she responded with a depth she hadn't known she possessed to poetry, politics, music, sex, everything. She closed her eyes dramatically. Everything. When he died, she said, everything went with him. The cloud over her soul returned, blacker than ever. Now it blotted out the earth. Tune in next week. The next chapter is melodrama.
It's perfect. That is just perfect.
That was great, Vivian.
Thank you. That sounds so good. Wayne, go.
That's my role model. That attitude is my role model for attitude, and also for prose.
Oh,
And maybe the two go together. We work on essays because we want to work on our attitudes, our the way we face the world. And
That's it.
this is the very first time I have ever actually seen that this piece does have attitude.
Yeah.
I never realized how ironic I sound here.
yeah, it's great.
Almost not.
Okay, Wayne, it's your turn.
Okay, I'm going to read from my essay that's in here, My 1980s, just a few little bits. In 1981, I made an onion bacon apple casserole from the joy of cooking. I served it as a main dish to a schizophrenic friend. A few years later, she sent me a letter dated 1975. The significant confusion of chronology meant that she had cracked up. I began methodically to cook from Marcella Hazan. I tirelessly stirred risotto in a cheap aluminum saucepan with high sides. I made a Baume au Trois chocolat from Julia Child, a molded dessert for which I used a beige Tupperware bowl. In 1983, I served a friend a veal roast stuffed with pancetta. We agreed that the roast tasted like human baby. He blamed the pancetta. Sometime in the mid-'80s, I stopped swallowing cum. I don't miss its taste. The first guy I knew with AIDS died at age 35. His name was Metro. I've written about this death before, and I hesitate to repeat myself. I have almost no visual memory of Metro, though I recall his precision and hyper-capability. We lay on a stony beach, Long Island Sound, more rock than sand. What sand there was, he dusted off his body with decisive, practiced gestures. I went to Paris for the first time in the 80s. I wore blue leather gloves purchased on Christopher Street. In a Rue Jacob hotel bedroom, I woke up sweat-drenched, feverish. I observed the wallpaper's mesmerizing, dull pattern, its refusal to serve as reliable augury. On the flight back from Paris, I read Marianne Moore's prose and picked up pointers from its ornery mannerism. Despite my best efforts, I existed in history, not as agent, but as frightened, introspective observer. I began to fine-tune my sentences, a fastidiousness I learned from Moore's prose. Precise sentences were my ideals, though in practice I was slipshod and sentimental. I began to seek a balance between improvisation and revision. I revised by endlessly retyping. Just skipping to a few sentences from toward the end. My mission in the 80s was to develop my aestheticism. My mission in the 90s was to justify my aestheticism. In New Haven, outside my apartment, 1989, I was mugged. A guy said, "Give me your wallet or I'll blow your brains out." In 1989, I developed a sustaining, mood-brightening crush on the UPS man. Hundreds, thousands of men and women in New Haven must have had a crush on that same UPS man. The first time he appeared at my doorstep with a package, I thought that a candid camera porn movie had just begun. If you want me to describe him, I will.
That was wonderful.
That was great, Wayne. So, you know, that a seemingly random
Right.
collection of details held together by what? Attitude, voice, sheer will?
Held together partly by the IBM Selectric typewriter that I still used in 2003, and by the, in a way, the kind of ceremony of self-editing, in a way, having a certain attitude toward this decade that I wanted to traverse. This was an assignment from a magazine right about the 1980s.
Mm.
And in 2,000 words or 1,500 words or whatever. And so I thought, drop the fishing rod into the pond, pick out 1 minute. And so a sense of just, my mission was to be pithy and to omit everything.
It fulfills that, but it is also true, whether you're conscious of it or not, it does feel as if every one of these pieces, these incidents, as if you're ruminating in some deep way, and out of that rumination is coming attitude, and out of attitude is coming I'm not saying it correctly, but it feels like that there is definitely a real link to all of these things. Somewhere deep inside yourself, you're ruminating on how did it feel, and coming up with these episodes.
It reminds me, I think in your essay as well, the whole essay, not just the parts you read, attitude comes from retrospect. And
yes.
The attitude that you sit down and you are going to generalize about your life, Jacobian, Shakespeare, and a certain kind of merciless width of generalizing power allows you to be severe.
Yeah, to ruminate, to introspect. Philip made that point to me years ago. I mean, not to me, he made it, and I like many others picked up on it. That essence of reflection, of the way in which one ruminates and reflects, and in the particular way in which you do it is really the lesson I think I absorbed the most. That, you know, there's got to be an idea behind. There's got to be some sort of aim, emotional or intellectual, whatever it is. There's an aim that's guiding these selections.
Right. I mean, the trick is to go from fragments to something that feels whole and organic. You know,
Exactly.
And the fragment doesn't necessarily mean that you've given up the hope of something whole and organic. You know.
And most of the time, you know, students especially, they hear fragment, they're happy. You know, they'll put down.
It's the new candy.
They don't know. Yeah, it is like, and they just put down, you know, this, that, and the other, and they haven't got a clue in the world that it doesn't amount to anything unless.
You're kind of a harsh teacher, Vivian. You know.
I hope I was the hard. I pride myself that I always made somebody cry. Usually a girl, but not always.
Get extra points if you make the boy cry.
That's right.
We're at this point where we can take questions and comments from the people who are listening in and watching. So Nadine, would you like to orchestrate that?
I would, though I can certainly listen to the three of you keep talking for a couple more hours. Mm-hmm. But we do have some questions from our audience. Here's a question from Nikki, who would like to know what distinguishes the American essay from other cultures?
That's a very good question. I think, you know, Emerson in that famous essay, The American Scholar, said we have to cut our ties with Europe. We have to think for ourselves. We have to stop being disciples of the English. Of course, Emerson could easily say that because he was the most well-read man in the country at that point. So it's easy for him to say, stop reading, you know, because he'd read everything. But I think that one of the ways of looking at it is that it intersects with American history. So it keeps intersecting with these problems and these potentials that come back again and again and again. And that was one of the things that I noticed when I was putting together this book, you know, feelings for and against immigrants, sexism, the whole racial dilemma, um, income inequality, democracy, um, you know, these kind of schisms, these kind of issues kept braiding into the American essay. And then I think that there is a kind of tendency, especially more recently, um, toward a kind of more colloquial, a kind of brasher sounding essay. That is, if you look at the essays in the 1950s, even people who were radicals politically, they still wrote in a rather formal, traditional way. And then you got these kind of, writers like Tom Wolfe and Hunter Thompson and Seymour Krim, who started shaking up the diction, and looking for something that had more of an American sound, just as American literature, like the hard-boiled school, Hemingway, were trying the same thing in fiction. So that's one answer.
Thank you. This is a question from Tara. Is there something about the language of English which especially supports the essay?
Well, it's funny that the first great essayist who everybody acknowledges is Michel de Montaigne, who was French. But curiously enough, the essay then gravitated to England. That is, instead of Montaigne giving birth to a whole lot of disciples, there was this whole flowering of the essay in England. You had these people like Addison and Steele and Hazlitt and Lamb and Samuel Johnson, Jonathan Swift, and so on. Whereas I think French, because it is this language, to use Vivian's word of clarity, didn't allow for as much muzziness or maziness that the essay can tolerate. So it moved into England and found a better home in England. In effect, in the continent, the essay still remained a kind of tool of intellectual discourse, whereas in England, it became more a kind of book of life, you might say.
Oh yeah.
Also, maybe the essay, America is a mess and has always been a mess, a fruitful mess, but a mess. And that the messiness has to, there's so much about the messiness that we all know, but that mess is conducive to the arguments of the contrary attestations of generation after generation of essayists, in a way that I think James Baldwin's essays bring, in a way, like the problems of America and the nature of the essay together in one kind of molten bundle.
Right. I think probably after Emerson, he's the most important essayist, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, it's inescapable that the culture, that every single thing that an essay uses, every kind of example, every stance, every tone of voice, it has to reflect the culture. And that's what makes, you read an essay by a Brit, it's unmistakable. There's a sound to that voice, no matter what position it takes, or no American could have written this. And conversely, no Brit could write what an American writes in English. It's almost indefinable. We keep on describing it, but we can't really. But that's what that's what it is.
A question from Helena. Do you feel that essays can qualify as poetry or vice versa, as they both are simply random details melded together by tone or attitude?
Well, I'm going to let Wayne answer that question because he's sometimes called a lyric essayist. I'm a little skeptical that it's the same, but go ahead.
I think genre, to some extent, genre is about context and duration and kind of attention that you grant to what you're reading, whether it's being performed, the assumptions that go into it. And I think that the acuity and glamour of sentences in good essays are poems, but in the same way that a 3-line movie review in a newspaper, one sentence of that could be a poem. So a lot of it is contextual, I think. I do think, though, that essays make use of the paragraph as a prosodic form in a way that, of course, fiction writers do as well, but that in the essay there can often be a sense of the periodicity and the unfolding and the playfulness about paragraphing.
It's interesting you say that, Wayne, because
Poetry.
you know I've often thought that there are sentence writers and paragraph writers, um, and I tend to think of myself as a paragraph writer, somebody who wants to get a head of steam going and move for a while, you know. And I like long paragraphs, in fact. And my friend Leonard Michaels was a sentence writer, you know. So you talked a lot about sentences, and in fact, you know, after I did Art of the Personal Essay, one of my great conversion experiences was falling in love with Emerson. And Emerson is a sentence writer, and his sentences are so strange, one right after another, almost like there's no flow. They just continue, you know, in this kind of paratactic way. So yeah, so what do you think about this sentence versus paragraph thing? Vivian, what do you think?
Me. Oh, yeah, I agree completely. There are sentence writers and there are paragraph writers, and I too am a paragraph writer. No, I think essays are essays and poems are poems. So I'm not a fan of you'll forgive me, of the lyric essay, because too often people get lost in language. They get lost in the image in the sentence. And, you know, when I used to teach, I used to say to my students, language is the enemy. we're not here to do language. We're here to do.
Oh, is that heretical?
Yeah, but it was that kind of thing. Nevertheless, I will say the greatest compliment I ever received in all my years of writing was a young woman, completely untutored, said to me of Fierce Attachments when it was published. She said, "Your clarity was a poem." And I was thrilled. I've never been so thrilled, really. She said, "Your clarity came to me like poetry." And of course, I didn't think it was poetry, but it was just thrilled that could, something like that could happen in a reader, that she could feel that equivalency.
Well, all the genres partake of each other, you know.
Yes.
And Wayne and I have both written poetry, so we've gone over to the dark side at times, you know.
Can I just say one thing about Leonard Michaels, because it means so much to me that in this book I am right next to Leonard Michaels, and that my essay is called My 1980s and his is called My Yiddish, because he was my teacher, my fiction writing teacher when I was 22.
Wow.
I don't think he paid very much attention to me at all or whatever, but it wasn't about anything like passing of the torch. But he did, I remember him saying in seminars, you can tell everything that's wrong or right with a story by its first sentence. And we would never move in a workshop past the first paragraph. All of that was right there. And I was, that curmudgeonly, contrarian focus on sentence rigor did have a huge impact on me.
Interesting.
So cheers to Leonard Michaels.
Yeah.
A question from Lily. Do any of you read out loud your essays as you write and then change things as a result? Or is it a silent visual writing process?
It's each. And just today, in desperation, I read out loud. When I can't get the thing straight, and I know it's not straight, I can't, but I know if I speak it out loud, I'll be able to hear all the glitches. I only read out loud in desperation.
I mean, I've had the experience of giving a reading, you know, and as I'm reading, I realized, oh no, these rhythms are wrong. You know, there's nothing what this sentence should be, you know. It's like you just want to, you know, close the book and get off the lectern. But I do think that one of the disadvantages of laptops and computers is that when I wrote on a typewriter, I had to keep retyping everything, and that was the equivalent of reading aloud, because each time I retyped it, I would get closer to the innate rhythms that the sentence wanted to be.
I would say that for me, I absolutely agree, Philip, that retyping used to be the way I could seize control of every word and make sure that that was the word I really meant. And now at the very end, sometimes before a piece is finished or sent off or whatever, I read it out loud as that kind of that safety net of, I want to really make sure that I'm paying attention in every word. And it's very clear when you read something out loud, when a word just doesn't belong.
Yeah. I mean, it's a sort of this mystical idea, like Louis Kahn, what does the stone want to be? But in a way, it's like sentences, they spring at a certain point. And if it's not springing at the right point, you got to do it again. Yeah.
Or as you say the word divots, and you realize, as I did, I don't know what divots means. And then you have to go look it up and realize divots does not mean indentations.
Oh, really?
It doesn't. It means like clots of lawn or whatever. But move on to the next question, perhaps,
Yeah.
right?
Well, along those lines, there's a question, do you write every day? And if so, do you have any rituals? How do you stay productive?
Oh, I'll leave it to you guys. I don't answer those questions. I
But
just,
you think of yourself as unproductive, even though you've written
no, I think
dozen books.
all of those how do you fill in the blank questions are unanswerable. How do I stay productive? How can I answer a question like that?
Well, I think that I remain productive by ignoring a lot of the world's business and my family and stuff like that, and just writing is such a salvation and a solution for me, that I'm happy to do it and to keep doing it. I don't write every day because I know that over the course of years the writing is going to get done. So I don't require myself to write every day. Sometimes I'm accused in my family of working every day, 7 days a week, which is probably true. But that's because it's fun for me.
It's just because you close the door to your study and they don't know what's going on inside.
I have a habit. I think I often feel right before I go to bed at night a deep sense of doom and fear about the perennial fear of life being wasted, or a sense of self rebuke and judgment about, not about productivity, but about whether I have had, the whole day was spent doing this and that. And did I actually have a illuminating or conscious thought, and did I write it down? Was I present for writing? And so I often, right before bed, will, in a kind of last chance before the night descends way, write something down just to kind of verify and redeem what might have felt like a potentially wasted day. That's
it's interesting. It's interesting. Sometimes I've kept diaries, and to write when you're really tired and even, disgruntled, and you just write anyway in a diary, not trying to write beautiful sentences, The other thing is that when I was doing this anthology, strangely enough, I felt when I was reading all this material and selecting it that I was writing it, that I was owning it in a certain way. So a friend said to me, well, what about your own work? And I didn't know what he was talking about, because I thought, well, at this moment, this stuff is passing through me and it feels like my own work.
And we are, I think many glorious writers have said that the important thing is not, in a way, one's own writing but the current of literature, and that it's the current of literature continues by passionate adherence to literature. And we are, in a way, acolytes of literature who are practicing it to the best of our abilities within our context, historical context, with our limitations. But it's the enterprise that we are carrying on with a kind of selflessness that's ironic, given how selfish writers are reputed to be.
Yes, Saul Bellows said that writers are readers who are moved to emulation.
What did you say, Vivian?
I said you're inspiring.
Writers are readers who are moved to emulation. So there it is.
There it is. Last word.
There are many more questions. Unfortunately, we only have time for one last question, and this one goes to Philip. One of our attendees would like to know, do you have any personal favorites among all the essays you chose?
Uh-oh.
Uh-oh. You don't have to pick me, Philip. You don't have to pick me.
You should say, pick me, like in elementary school, I love all my children equally.
I've heard that before.
Yes. And it's always been untrue.
That's funny. Yeah.
Perfect. Well, with that, I want to thank all of you, Philip, Vivian, Wayne. Thank you so much for a wonderful discussion. Again, everybody, the book can be purchased from our independent bookseller, Books on Call. It's also, there it is. Support independent booksellers there. Oh my God, perfect. The link is in the chat, or you can reach out to the National Arts Club. We're happy to share that with you again. Thank you to everybody who joined us tonight. We're so appreciative of all of you. And again, thank you and have a good night, everyone.
Thank you, Nadine.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night, everybody.